Princess Anne had faced family scandals, constitutional emergencies, and private betrayals without allowing her expression to change. But when a sealed court order was placed before her, even the famously controlled Princess Royal could not conceal her shock. The ruling was direct, humiliating, and impossible to soften. Camilla had been ordered to return Diana's most private tiara set. In one moment, a collection of jewels became evidence in a far more dangerous struggle over memory, inheritance, and royal power. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne sat inside Buckingham Palace before most senior household members knew why the morning meeting had been called. Buckingham Palace is the monarch's main working residence, where official business is handled. A court judgment, meaning a formal ruling issued by a judge, rested inside the sealed folder. It stated plainly that Camilla must surrender Diana's private tiara set and return it to the collection reserved for her descendants. The distinction mattered. These were not crown jewels, the nationally owned ceremonial pieces used during state occasions. They were personal objects tied to Diana's identity, her sons, and the legacy she intended to leave. The ruling suggested the palace had treated a mother's inheritance as another royal possession. It also pulled William and Harry into a dispute they had never chosen. Anne read the final paragraph twice. Her expression hardened as the wording became impossible to dismiss. She lowered the document and asked why the matter had reached a public court. No one answered clearly, because the judgment referred to an undisclosed instruction bearing Diana's signature and witnessed before her death. Someone had known that paper existed. Someone had chosen to ignore it. Camilla received the same news elsewhere and reacted with disbelief. She insisted the jewels had been placed under her control through palace arrangements approved years earlier. Yet the Queen Consort's anger could not erase the central fact. The court had not merely questioned possession. It had raised the possibility that senior officials knowingly pushed aside Diana's written wishes. Anne closed the folder, removed her glasses, and let the silence stretch. Then she said, "Bring me everyone who touched this file." No one moved. The greatest shock was no longer that Camilla had been ordered to return the set. It was that someone inside the royal household, the staff supporting the monarch, may have known for years that the jewels were never hers to keep. Before Anne could confront the hidden machinery behind the decision, she first had to face the two women whose histories had become trapped inside the same jewels. The tiara set carried no voice, yet it had become the loudest object in the monarchy. To Camilla, it represented acceptance after years of rejection and proof that she had finally been welcomed into the royal center. To Anne, it carried the memory of a woman whose pain had reshaped the family forever. Neither could look at the jewels without seeing the past. And now the court had forced both women to confront what the palace had spent decades trying to bury. Anne had built her life around discipline, duty, and loyalty to the crown, even when loyalty demanded painful honesty. The crown meant the monarchy as an institution, not simply the wishes of one family member. That distinction now trapped her between protecting Charles's household and respecting Diana's written wishes. William and Harry had carried the emotional cost of their mother's death for years, and she knew this ruling would force both sons back into wounds the palace had never fully healed. Camilla sat alone after the judgment arrived. Her hand moved toward the empty space where the tiara case had been kept, but the polished surface offered nothing back. Staff had already begun preparing an official inventory, a formal list recording every piece that would be surrendered. She understood what that meant. Returning the set would not merely remove jewelry from her rooms. It would publicly challenge whether the privileges granted to her had ever been legitimate. William entered the crisis without shouting. His quiet resolve unsettled Anne more than anger would have. The prince chose each word carefully because the jewels were tied to his mother's identity, her private wishes, and the inheritance meant for her children. He did not want revenge, but he would no longer accept silence disguised as stability. Catherine had seen the set months earlier, during a private palace preparation. She had refused to wear it after learning that uncertainty surrounded Diana's intentions. The Princess of Wales later confirmed that decision in a documented account shared with William, explaining that no royal appearance was worth reopening a family wound. Her refusal had remained hidden, but now it proved that doubts existed long before the court intervened. Anne then discovered something worse. Harry had never been formally informed that the private collection had passed into Camilla's control, despite being Diana's second son. The Duke learned of the transfer only through a recorded legal briefing connected to the court case. His exclusion made the dispute feel less like an oversight and more like a decision made behind closed doors. William finally faced Anne in private. "This is not about punishing anyone," he said. "It is about correcting what should never have happened." She studied his face and heard Diana's determination beneath his calm. The ruling had reopened an old wound, but the true point of no return lay in a single decision made months earlier beneath the palace's ceremonial calm. Every royal crisis has a moment that appears harmless until history gives it a different meaning. In this case, it came during preparations for a private diplomatic banquet at Windsor Castle. Camilla had selected Diana's tiara, set for the evening, believing its return to royal use would signal continuity. Instead, that choice triggered an objection, exposed a hidden instruction, and sent the dispute toward court. What seemed like a question of jewelry became the moment the monarchy could no longer avoid Diana's final wishes. Camilla stood before several approved pieces, presented by senior dressers, and made her choice without hesitation. A diplomatic banquet is a formal royal dinner held for foreign representatives, where every detail carries political meaning. Wearing Diana's tiara would show continuity to the guests, but it would also suggest that the painful past had been absorbed into the present. The Queen Consort believed that message would strengthen her place. Others understood it could reopen a wound the family had never truly closed. One dresser froze when the case was opened. Beneath the inventory card lay a handwritten archive note stating that the set should not be worn outside Diana's direct family line. An archive note is a preserved written instruction, kept with historic records. Palace officials had treated it for years as a personal preference, rather than a binding order, allowing them to avoid deciding who legally controlled the jewels. That silence now carried a cost. Catherine recognized the set and quietly warned William. She told him that wearing it would cause pain no diplomatic success could justify. The princess had once refused the same pieces after learning their ownership was uncertain, and her decision had been recorded in a private wardrobe account. William listened carefully because he knew the jewels were not just ornaments. They were tied to his mother's identity, his brother's inheritance, and the dignity of both sons. Camilla heard of the objection and took it as a direct challenge. She asked whether she would forever be denied anything linked to the woman who came before her. The Queen's anger came from years of comparison, but William's response remained controlled. He was not defending an image, he was defending a written boundary. The senior dresser returned with an older storage ledger, a formal record showing where royal possessions were originally catalogued. It revealed that the set had been listed separately from institutional jewels, and directed officials to a solicitor's copy of Diana's signed instruction. That document established that the tiara was intended to pass through her son's family line. William placed the archive note on a table between himself and Camilla. She did not touch it. "You knew there was a question," he said. She held his gaze and answered, "A question is not a verdict." Camilla refused to withdraw her claim. Diana's representatives then sought a formal legal determination, turning a private disagreement into the court battle now shaking the palace. Anne finally understood that the disaster had been avoidable, but the next confrontation would demand a brutal choice between family unity and the authority of law. The hidden document had explained how the battle began. Now Anne had to walk into the room, where loyalty, pride, and Diana's memory would collide face to face. No aides remained in the room when Princess Anne faced Camilla. The court order rested on the table between them, untouched and impossible to ignore. Anne had not come to offer comfort, and Camilla had no intention of appearing defeated. Years of private resentment now gathered around one question: had the Queen knowingly held something that Diana had intended for her children, or had the palace allowed a misunderstanding to become a public humiliation? Anne chose a small Buckingham Palace sitting room because she wanted no staff member, advisor, or relative shaping the exchange. A court order is a legally binding command that must be obeyed, even by members of the royal family. She told Camilla the judgment had to be followed at once. Any delay would make the monarchy appear to believe that privilege placed it above the law, and that accusation could damage more than one household. Camilla did not lower her voice. She accused the family of abandoning her the moment Diana's name became politically dangerous. The Queen Consort said she had spent years carrying the blame for a history no one else had been brave enough to confront. Now, she argued, the same people who had once approved her access to the jewels were stepping back and allowing her to stand alone. Anne's expression hardened. She said this was not a contest between two women and not another public trial over old wounds. It was about whether a dead mother's written wishes had been pushed aside because those wishes were inconvenient. The Princess Royal knew the difference mattered. If the palace ignored private instructions whenever they clashed with royal comfort, then no family promise inside the monarchy could ever be trusted. Camilla rose from her chair. She asked whether Anne had ever defended her with the same passion. The accusation hung between them. Anne remained seated and answered, "I defend the crown when the crown is right." Camilla flinched, not because the words were loud, but because they left no room to hide. The argument changed when Camilla revealed, through a recorded private conversation later entered into the Palace Review, that Charles had personally told her the tiara formed part of the sovereign household's usable collection. The sovereign household means the official working structure and possessions controlled for the monarch's duties. Anne immediately saw the danger. Her brother may have approved access without ever seeing Diana's original instruction, or senior officials may have deliberately protected him from it. Camilla reached into her handbag and removed a small key. She placed it beside the order. The metal struck the table with a sharp finality. It opened the secure case holding the jewels. Anne's anger softened for one brief moment. She saw not victory, but humiliation. Camilla feared the ruling had reduced her entire royal life to another comparison with Diana. The key surrendered possession, but it did not explain who had granted the claim. That answer now led directly to Charles. Camilla had yielded possession, but the question of authority moved beyond her and toward the man whose approval had made the crisis possible. The court had issued the order, but someone inside the monarchy had created the conditions that made it necessary. When Anne entered the king's private study, Charles was already holding the authorization document. His signature appeared at the bottom, granting Camilla access to the disputed collection. Yet attached to it was no copy of Diana's instruction, no warning from palace lawyers, and no acknowledgement that her sons might object. For the first time, the king understood that his approval had been built upon silence. Charles held constitutional authority within the royal household, the official structure that manages the monarch's duties, staff, and working affairs. Yet that authority had limits. Private property and personal inheritance could not simply be absorbed into royal use because a sovereign approved it. Diana's possessions remained tied to legal ownership, family wishes, and the rights of her sons. That made the missing instruction more than an oversight. It made the entire authorization vulnerable. Anne watched her brother read the page again. Senior courtiers had prepared the document and placed it among a larger group of household approvals, making it easy to sign without seeing the danger hidden beneath it. The king set down his pen and asked whether William believed he had acted deliberately against Diana's wishes. His voice remained controlled, but the question exposed the fear beneath the crown. Anne refused to protect him with comforting words. She said, intent mattered inside a family, but consequence mattered before the public. Charles might not have known, yet his signature had still given Camilla access. William would see the pain caused, not merely the explanation offered afterward. The future king had already spent years watching private mistakes become public wounds. Charles admitted through a recorded conversation, entered into the internal review, that he wanted Camilla to feel secure and fully accepted. He had approved the arrangement because advisors told him the disputes over Diana's possessions had long been settled. The monarch believed he was closing an old chapter. Instead, he had signed his name across a question no one had allowed him to examine. Anne then found the missing piece. A legal appendix, meaning an attached section containing extra evidence, had been removed before the file reached the sovereign. It specifically mentioned Diana's signed instruction. The document log showed that a senior household official had handled it, someone whose duty was to keep private family disputes away from the king. Charles pressed his hand against the authorization. Then my signature was used to settle a question I was never permitted to see. The balance shifted at once. He ordered an internal review, accepted the court ruling without appeal, and authorized the immediate return of the Tiara set. The decision protected the monarchy from appearing above the law, but it wounded Camilla deeply. To her, Charles had chosen the survival of the institution over the dignity of his wife. The legal battle had been decided on paper, but its true cost would be measured when the jewels left Camilla's rooms for the final time. The return of the tiara did not happen during a grand ceremony. There were no cameras, proclamations, or public witnesses. A royal security officer entered Camilla's private suite, carrying an inventory sheet, while two members of staff waited beside the open case. For years, the jewels had represented her arrival at the center of royal life. Now, as each piece was checked and removed, the queen watched that acceptance being dismantled. One clasp, one stone, and one signature at a time. Camilla remained standing, while the officer began the formal transfer. An inventory sheet is an official record used to identify and confirm every item being moved. Each piece was matched against Diana's private list under court supervision, meaning the process was legally observed to prevent anything from being hidden, replaced, or disputed later. The set contained the central tiara, matching earrings, and a smaller ornament rarely seen in public but closely tied to Diana's personal history. The queen consort refused to sit. She feared that lowering herself into a chair would make her look defeated before the staff who had served her for years. When the officer read the final description aloud, she asked whether the jewels would be given directly to Catherine. The question exposed more than anger. Camilla feared the return was not simply legal correction, but a symbolic replacement, one woman losing what another would soon wear. Anne answered without cruelty. She explained that the collection would be secured for Diana's descendants, and that no piece would be worn until William and Harry agreed on its future. The Princess Royal knew why that mattered. Both sons had inherited the emotional weight of their mother's possessions, and any rushed decision could turn a private inheritance into another public family battle. The officer lifted the inner lining of the case and stopped. Beneath it lay a folded card bearing Diana's handwriting. Anne opened it slowly. The message stated that the smallest ornament should one day be offered to a granddaughter who understood the cost of royal duty. Anne read the line again and looked toward the doorway. Catherine stood there with Charlotte, unaware that the inventory had reached its most painful discovery. The young princess sensed the tension and did not enter. Her mother placed a hand against her shoulder, while Camilla stared at the card that had transformed a legal surrender into a message across generations. Camilla's anger finally gave way to exhaustion. She signed the transfer document, placed the pen down, and left without asking to see the jewels again. Staff loyalties immediately began to fracture. Charles withdrew from a planned private dinner, while William insisted through a recorded family conversation that Diana's card must never be used as a weapon against anyone. The case had been removed, the signatures completed, and the doors closed. But one conversation still remained, before resentment hardened into something permanent. For the first time since the ruling, Anne and Camilla met without documents between them. No secretary recorded their words. No advisor stood beyond the door. The tiara was gone, the legal question settled, and both women had exhausted their anger. What remained was more difficult: the truth. Camilla had to admit why she had held onto the set so fiercely, while Anne had to decide whether justice required punishment, or whether the family could finally stop using Diana's memory as a weapon. Anne requested the meeting after learning that Camilla had withdrawn from several family engagements. Clarence House, the London residence used by senior royals, offered privacy without the weight of Buckingham Palace. Both women entered knowing the court ruling could not be reversed. Ownership had been settled. What remained was humiliation, resentment, and the damage left behind when a family allowed legal language to speak for emotions it had avoided for years. Camilla broke the silence first. She admitted in the private conversation that she had wanted the tiara because wearing something tied to Diana felt like proof that the monarchy had finally accepted the whole past, including her place within it. The queen consort believed the jewels could turn rejection into continuity. Instead, they exposed how deeply she still feared being treated as temporary. Anne did not soften the truth. She told Camilla that acceptance could not be created by taking possession of something another woman had deliberately protected for her children. The Princess Royal understood why that mattered. William and Harry had already lost control over much of their mother's public story, and the tiara had become one of the few private wishes they could still defend. Camilla lowered her voice. She confessed that every royal milestone still felt like a trial, in which she was measured against someone who could no longer answer back. The comparison had followed her through marriage, ceremony, and public duty. Success had brought status, but never peace. Anne acknowledged her own failure. She admitted that decades of family silence had forced objects, photographs, and ceremonies to carry burdens that honest conversations should have faced. The palace had treated pain as something that could be managed rather than resolved. Camilla then revealed that she had never seen Diana's signed instruction until the legal case began. Her statement, preserved in a confidential account of the meeting, confirmed that she had acted stubbornly, but without full knowledge of the document. Anne moved the untouched tea tray aside and reached across the table. Not forgiveness, not comfort, an ending. "Return what was hers," she said. "Keep what is honestly yours." Camilla agreed to no appeal, no private protest, and no attempt to influence who would wear the set. Anne promised the palace review would expose the procedural failure, instead of placing every ounce of blame on one woman. Inside Clarence House, the anger finally broke. Outside its walls, the public was only beginning to decide what the surrender meant. By sunrise, the private transfer had become a public reckoning. One newspaper carried a full-page image of Diana wearing the tiara beside a photograph of the sealed case, leaving royal custody. Its headline read, "Her wishes, finally honored." Within hours, crowds gathered near Buckingham Palace. Broadcasters debated the court's power over royal privilege, and the monarchy faced a judgment larger than the legal ruling. The public was no longer asking who owned the jewels. It was asking whether Diana had finally been heard. Buckingham Palace confirmed that the tiara set had been returned in full compliance with the court judgment, while refusing to discuss private exchanges between family members. A court judgment is a binding legal decision that even the monarchy must obey. That distinction mattered because the case had become a test of whether royal privilege could override personal inheritance. It also mattered because Diana's sons had spent years watching their mother's memory debated by others. Broadcasters treated the ruling as an unprecedented collision between royal tradition, private ownership, and unresolved grief. One leading evening presenter opened with the words, "Tonight, A royal jewel has become a test of whether memory can outrank power. The sentence spread quickly because it captured what the public already felt. The story was no longer about stones. It was about whether a dead woman's written wishes could survive the institution that once failed her. A crowd gathered at the palace gates before midday. One woman stepped forward and placed a single white rose beneath a printed image of Diana wearing the tiara. Others fell silent. That small gesture became the emotional center of the day, turning anger into remembrance. Camilla's supporters pushed back. They condemned the coverage as cruel and argued that the queen consort had again been made the sole villain in a failure created by advisors, missing documents, and years of family silence. Their defense mattered, because blame had begun to simplify a far more painful truth. William watched the broadcast beside Catherine and refused any celebratory statement. The prince said in a recorded family discussion that his mother's wishes should be honored without humiliating another woman. She agreed, knowing that victory built on public shame would only repeat the cruelty they claimed to oppose. Charles then authorized the release of a limited inventory protocol, a formal rule requiring written consent before private royal property could ever be reassigned. The king hoped the change would prove that the monarchy had learned. Anne left Buckingham Palace through the main entrance, rather than avoiding the crowd. She saw the white rose, paused, and said nothing. Her silence carried more weight than a speech. Public anger slowly turned into respect, as the palace accepted the ruling, refused an appeal, and changed its procedures. The public had transformed the jewels into a symbol of accountability, but only the family's final decision could bring the story to an honest end. Here is the final section with the requested closing line included exactly at the end. The final decision was made without ceremony. Diana's tiara set would not enter Camilla's collection, return to general royal use, or become a trophy in a battle between past and present. It would be placed in a protected family trust for William and Harry's descendants, exactly as her private instruction intended. The ruling had begun with shock and humiliation, but it ended with something the monarchy had denied itself for too long: a clear acknowledgement that Diana's wishes possessed meaning beyond her death. William and Harry reached their agreement through a recorded private family conference. The full set would remain secured in trust, a legal arrangement that protects property for chosen beneficiaries and prevents any single person or household from claiming permanent control. The central tiara would be reserved for a future family occasion, selected jointly by Diana's sons. It would not be used as a political symbol, a public victory, or a weapon against Camilla. Charlotte's future was also settled. The smaller ornament mentioned in Diana's card would pass to her when she reached adulthood, not as a royal reward, but as a private inheritance from grandmother to granddaughter. William believed that distinction mattered. The young princess would receive something tied to family memory, not to rank, pressure, or public expectation. Anne personally placed the restored inventory, Diana's signed instruction, and the new trust document inside the archive case. An archive case is a protected container used to preserve important records and historic possessions. Before closing it, the Princess Royal rested her hand on the lid. "This time," she said quietly, "it stays where she asked." Camilla accepted the arrangement without appeal. She sent the secure case key to William without a message, choosing surrender over another round of conflict. The Queen Consort's years of service were not erased, but the crisis exposed the danger of seeking acceptance through objects connected to unresolved pain. Her silence became the final proof that the claim was over. Charles responded by signing new rules requiring direct legal review and written consent before private royal possessions could ever be reassigned. The king understood that the monarchy had nearly allowed convenience to defeat responsibility. His signature now corrected the damage his earlier approval had helped create. Anne no longer saw the judgment as an attack on her brother's household. She saw it as a correction the crown should have made before a court was forced to intervene. Her shock had become action. By confronting Camilla, challenging Charles, and demanding the truth, she protected the monarchy by refusing to protect its mistake. Diana's tiara had become more than jewelry. It proved that personal wishes could survive institutional power. The monarchy endured because it accepted responsibility, returned the set to her family, and finally gave a decades-old wound a dignified end. The case closed with no victory celebration. Only the quiet certainty that Diana's final wishes had been heard, her children's inheritance had been protected, and the crown had learned that dignity begins where possession ends. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.